Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Sri Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. This output explores the punishment for Beadbi as a personal set of opinions following on from the conclusion set in the official Bunga Azaadi position OBAP document on the death penalty as of 18th of December 2023. As with all outputs not marked as official Bunga Azaadi position documents, this piece represents the opinions of the author only and not the Bunga as a whole. However, just like OBAPs, scrutiny is more than welcomed. Anything said here is up for being contested, respectfully, and you're encouraged to articulate your counter-arguments and or feedback by emailing us at contact@azaadism.co.uk. Just a disclaimer then first before we begin. This is a podcast version of this publication. A written version is also available in the Law and Order Vichaar repository, which you can access via the website at www.azaadism.co.uk/bunga. The written version also contains some endnotes and additional thoughts that didn't quite fit in the main body of this piece, as well as links to any of the posts mentioned in this. So before we begin, it is crucial to understand that when I'm talking about the death penalty, I'm talking about the decision as to whether or not it is justified to kill someone for a crime after they've been apprehended and no longer able to cause further harm. I'm not referring to killing someone, evading, resisting capture, or being caught in the act of a crime when talking about the death penalty specifically. Please keep this distinction in mind. I also want to stress that this is all my personal opinion and I'm offering it as something to contribute towards your own Vichaar process. I'm not a Dera Baba who you must accept every word of like a sheep. You can question and grill me on any of this. So part 1. Beadbi, who decides? Firstly, let's start with who gets to decide what is classed as Beadbi. There are some things that we can all pretty much agree on. For example, the intentional destruction or damaging of surus are pretty clear cut. However, it starts getting a bit trickier when advocating for punishment on the basis of respect. The reason being is that what constitutes as disrespectful is not an objective measure. It depends heavily on culture, upbringing, personal family values and individual experiences. This makes the concept of respect less acute in its application than something like destruction, which can also be classed as a respect violation, but can be more objectively assessed as a property violation, which I'll talk a bit more about later. What person A constitutes as disrespect may be different to person B. Obviously, there are some more objective indicators that most people can agree on, as I mentioned previously with destruction, but can you see how monopolizing the decision-making in some singular authority can present problems in of itself? Hence, answering the question of who gets to decide is an important precursor discussion that must be considered seriously. And if you say something silly like the Azaadi, i.e. the current corrupted SGPC Sargun pseudo-papacy that are currently swatting the castle's parliament building, then you've proven to me you are not capable of having this discussion. I encourage you, if you have not already, to read the post Sikhs Have No Pope, available on Azaadism Instagram. It will be linked in the write-up accompanying this podcast. Part 2. Sargun versus Nirgun. This is an important concept that I don't think gets talked about enough and is overlooked. There seems to be a lack of general understanding regarding what our current guru exactly is. Too often do I see lists of Sikh gurus missing out the Guru Khalsa Panth, for instance, often from Sikhs themselves. This is a tragic display of our Panth's lack of awareness of our own traditions, but for a more specific Vichaar, I encourage listeners to view the post "The Khalsa is the Guru" on this topic, again linked in the write-up accompanying this podcast. It is imperative to understand the following things. 1. Guru equals darkness to light, an enlightener. It is not just a word for teacher, as it is so poorly translated into these days. Guru means darkness, representing ignorance, and Ru means light, representing wisdom and knowledge. Therefore, a guru could be seen more as a verb than a noun and describes a process of bringing light into darkness, enlightenment. The way it is used as a noun is to denote specific individuals who embody this verb and are able to share it with others. When we believe in the gurus, we are not revering the flesh, body and bones, we are revering the very thing that is enlightened to itself, ik-oankar, for which the vessel is a conduit for. That vessel does not always have to be a single human body either. Point 2. One guru, many vessels. Which brings us on to the second point. Technically, there isn't 10, 11 or 12 gurus. There is only one guru that passes his metaphorical light from one vessel to the next. This is known as Jyoti Jyot, passing on the light, Jyot, to another, like a lit candle lighting another. Point 3. Guru Granth and Guru Panth. For most Sikhs, this process is traditionally accepted to have occurred 10 times as the Guru Gaddi, Guruship, was passed on through Guru Nanak to Guru Gobind Singh, and then something special happened. The Guruship passed on to a non-human vessel and are decentralized amongst many conscious Sikhs. Most Sikhs today are consciously aware that the Guru Gaddi was passed on to the Guru Granth Sahib, the Shabad, but for some reason forget about the Guru Gaddi given to the Guru Khalsa Panth. Therefore, it must be stressed that the current Guru for most Sikhs who accept and believe in the mandates of Guru Gobind Singh is both in the form of Guru Granth Sahib and the Guru Khalsa Panth. Point 4. Nirgun and Sargun. Lastly, there is the concept of Nirgun and Sargun mentioned in Sikhi. Nirgun refers to the formless, no qualities, attributes, whereas Sargun refers to the opposite, as tangible realities that possess qualities, attributes and forms. This is then how we can describe the seemingly dual nature of the Guru and the vessel I have been using as a placeholder. The underlying Guru nature is the Nirgun aspect, whereas the outward interface/vessel is the Sargun aspect. Applying this to the Guru Granth, the Sargun Swarup form is the physical book with the pages and ink, etc. that we see enthroned in Gurdwara. Sort of. I have a personal qualm with this, which we covered later in this piece. During the time of the human manifestation of the Guru, the human bodies of Guru Nanak to Guru Gobind Singh were the Sargun Swarup, but the inner Guru nature that was passed on between them and eventually to the Khalsa was the Nirgun aspect. So now, given the above clarification of my own personal understanding, we can tie this back to our discussion on Beadbi. Beadbi of the Sargun Swarup of the Guru Granth Sahib occurs when there is destruction or damage done to the physical Granth and or any subjective respect-based additional factors we may apply. However, it is crucial to understand that despite what may happen to the Sargun aspect, the Nirgun aspect is unaffected. The Guru is not just the Sargun, and so no one can ever destroy the Guru via physical harm. Nirgun Beadbi is slightly more obscure, but in my opinion, far more common yet ignored. How do you commit sacrilege to something that is formless? Through degrading its philosophical status. This occurs when Sikhs themselves take the Guru for granted and blindly ritualize the experience of having its darshan. Everyone goes to the Gurdwara and bows their head, but how many know and understand what the Shabads being read are revealing? How many just go in, smack their head on the floor and leave? As someone said recently, people have reduced the Gurdwara experience to just a headbutt buffet. In small Gurdwara, we may do Sakhasan early and place the Swarup in Sachkhand. It is not uncommon to see Sangat arriving later, come and just mutadek to an empty palki, not having a clue. But the greatest dishonour to the Shabad is when Sikhs do not make an effort to read it, learn it, sing it or hear it be sung. If you are bowing to it but do not take Sikhya from it and apply it to your lives, then you are making it into a murti, an idol. This is the exact Brahmanvad that the Gurus in their human Sargun forms came to urge us against. This sort of Nirgun Beadbi happens every day, and we need to be equally against this also. In my opinion, blind literalism is also a form of Nirgun Beadbi as well, particularly the manipulation of Gurbani or doing mental gymnastics to justify your Baba or your offshoot traditions, interpretations, and then impose it on everyone else as if it is the only legitimate perspective all Sikhs must have. The Guru is Jagat Guru for all the world, and hence resonates with each individual Sikh specifically at their own level. Bani is designed in such a way that different parts of it will be more or less relevant to you depending on your own level of understanding and life experiences. This may change over time, and hence why so much of true Sikhi is about the development of a personal relationship between the Guru and the Sikh. The introduction to the Azaadi manifesto covers this specific Vichaar extensively, and I encourage you to read that for more detail on this. This concludes the preamble in preparation for the next part, Part 3, Punishment for Beadbi. Before we discuss this, I must remind you of that important caveat to this whole debate that I mentioned in the beginning, which is that the death penalty is the decision to execute someone for a crime after they have been apprehended and are no longer able to cause further harm. I'm not referring to killing someone evading or resisting capture or being caught in the act of a crime when talking about the death penalty specifically. In light of the recently released OBAP document on the death penalty, I want to now explore why death may not necessarily always be the appropriate punishment for perpetrators of Beadbi. Some of you may have an instant allergic reaction to that, but I implore you to hear out the following arguments to, at the very least, see it from my perspective. I too used to believe up until recently that giving a death penalty should be a common sense, even an obvious consequence of such an action. But a short while before Bunga Azaadi's Darbar on this, I started to have doubt and became undecided. Since that Darbar and hearing out the various arguments for and against the death penalty in general, I also spent some time now contemplating it on my own as applied to this topic specifically. The following is a result of that contemplation: the motivation to punish. To begin with, let's first ask, why do we punish someone for a crime? There are three main angles to this we can identify alongside their underlying motivations. 1. To take revenge or retribution against someone, which is motivated by anger and hate, krodh. 2. To prevent them from causing further harm, which is motivated by justice and duty, dharma. 3. To act as a deterrent for others who may do something similar, which is motivated by logic and reason, at least in theory. For point 3, I say in theory because, like many, I used to think that severe punishments indeed act as effective deterrents for crimes. I no longer believe this is the case and changed my mind when finding out about the large body of research presenting the case against this view and highlights the insufficient evidence to back up the claim that the death penalty deters certain crimes. This point was covered in the OBAP too, and I encourage you to go research it for yourselves. At the very least, I no longer have confidence in the claim that simply imposing capital punishments for certain crimes is an effective way to prevent Beadbi from happening. But studies aside, let's look at this through a logic and reason exercise. If you believe that the way to prevent this crime is to establish strong deterrence, then would you advocate for keeping a perpetrator alive but brutally torturing them? Death is simply too easy. We could skin them alive, amputate their limbs without anesthesia, burn, electrocute and waterboard them. On top of this, let's publicly broadcast the experience for all to see. What could be a stronger deterrent than this? The perpetrator would be begging for death as a mercy. Why should there be a limit on the punishment handed out to someone committing Beadbi? Now, most people are going to be put off by the above sarcastic suggestion. Why? I thought the goal was to create a deterrent. Surely, if you broadcast the most brutal torture imaginable, it would soak fear into the hearts of any potential perpetrator. The reason why is because people are not truly advocating for death for these crimes, they are advocating for a satisfaction of their growth. Since people's tolerance is different, some people's growth is deeper, so they are willing to go further. Hence why I describe some of the worst tortures imaginable to try and capture the most amount of people in disgust, and even then there are probably some sadists who will go further. If you have already apprehended someone and removed all their ability to cause further harm, what then is the need to kill them? As I just stated, you have already stopped and incapacitated them from doing further harm, so it can only ever be to satisfy your own growth if you wish to kill them despite this. Therefore, I do not think many who advocate for death are motivated by logic and reason, and instead more driven by the underlying motivators of the first angle. The irony is that the very Grant that is being attacked is urging people to abandon growth, but the funniest part is that most people calling for a death penalty won't even chatka a chicken. There must also be an appreciation that there are indeed different scenarios which demand tailored consideration. If you have captured someone who has willingly surrendered and accepted to be held subject to a trial to face justice, then this should be taken into account when determining an appropriate punishment. It should be different, less severe punishment than someone who was captured unwillingly trying to evade accountability. If the punishment is the same either way, then you have removed any incentive for a perpetrator to come forward on their own, which would conserve the band's resources. We should also be giving them an opportunity to explain themselves both from a moral and strategic perspective. Not all perpetrators of a crime will be motivated by the same thing, and it is important we investigate if we are to develop effective strategies to prevent further instances, as we shall cover a bit later. Everyone envisions a stereotype of a person that commits Beadbi as some fascist Indian nationalist, fueled by blind hatred. This makes it easy, hence why we are so quick to jump to a death penalty as punishment. But the real world is complex. When you start to factor in people with genuine mental illnesses who may have no control over their actions, or people in poverty being paid to do it, or maybe even consider hypothetical scenarios where people have their own lives or the lives of their families threatened to pressure them to do it, now what seems black and white becomes a bit greyer. Doesn't mean that the actions are justified, but it does mean that the method we choose to punish may be different. It may also turn out there is more to do than just punish and wait for the next issue to be outraged by. Hence why I don't believe in a one-size-fits-all solution with this, and why I think we need to do our best at preventing and minimizing the risk from different factors individually. The idea of capture too is an important one. Too often do we, in our emotion, jump to the extreme without any consideration or moderation of our own mental states, even if it is completely understandable. However, if we are going to be the Guru Khalsa and live up to our status of the Guru, then we must work harder than others to regulate ourselves and remain just and rational. There is a difference between vengeance and justice, but that line is blurred the more we give in to anger and hatred. If we accept the Guru to embody the qualities of Ikku and God, then the Guru Khalsa must also strive to emulate the qualities of Nirpau and Nirvair. Even with that famous Sakhi attributed to Guru Gobind Singh of the response to a stone being cast is to throw a brick back, and then if they throw a boulder in response you throw a mountain, the escalation is still measured and conducted step by step. You don't just jump to throwing a mountain straight away. Sam Dam Dand Bed. There is also another concept associated with the Guru, of Sam Dam Dand and Bed, which has earlier appearances in the works of Chanakya, which are also studied in the darbars of the Guru, Kavi Senapat being a principal example. Through this, we can model our responses to things to ensure we are fighting as Kshatriya on the basis of Miri and Piri, not just Miri. Psalm, negotiation, reconciliation and persuasion. Offer an opportunity for a fair trial, hearing out the motivations as to why the perpetrator did such a thing. This allows for an opportunity for understanding on both sides. As I mentioned above, not everyone's motivations are going to be the same even if the outcome is. There is more than one way to a destination, and uncovering the route taken is valuable in our endeavour to stop occurrences happening again. For instance, a trial may reveal that the perpetrator was framed and the real instigators are someone else. If we just kill the accused straight away without thinking, we will sabotage our own investigations. Perhaps their family has been taken hostage, and hence why they did this, and so then it must also be the duty of the Khalsa to go and save them also. Again, it doesn't mean that a punishment is still not given to the accused if found guilty. There are many possibilities that require a more nuanced approach and a greater sense of professionalism that we as a Bandh currently lack. There are many possibilities that require more nuanced approaches and a greater sense of professionalism that we as a Bandh clearly lack. Dharm, material inducement or offering monetary or other material incentives. If the above is not possible and no one comes forward on their own, then we could use this principle. Money is a tool that can be used either against you or for you. These days, most people just see it as something you chase blindly, like an animal chases its next meal. As the Khalsa, our khazana must be varied and contain more shastra than rusty or medieval blades. Money is perhaps one of the most important shastra we can wield, if we know how to use it. In this case, we can pool funds and set a bounty offering a reward for information about perpetrators, helping us bring them to justice. We can also use the money to grease the wheels, so to speak, of substandard justice systems so they are more inclined to put in the effort to help us. Money allows us to hire full-time investigators, hunters and trackers. Through this, many opportunities and scope in which to act become available, but it is imperative that we build the correct systems of accountability in which to siphon funds through, otherwise this method can easily be corrupted and turned against us and our intended goals. Dand, physical punishment through use of force. If these fails, then it is appropriate to use force in whatever way is appropriate. Again, in respect of appropriate escalation, the priority should be to capture alive and put through an investigation and a trial. However, resistance should be matched to protect the lives and property of innocents. If the perpetrator or perpetrators present violence, then the Khalsa should use its Vivek Buddhi to analyse the situation and apply the right amount of force as needed. If it results in a shootout or something and the perpetrators are killed, then fine, so long as all the other means were tried and the intention was there to capture alive. Only the participating Khalsa task force would truly know that. But I suppose we can do debriefs and post-operation investigations to ensure lessons are learned and to check that excessive force was not applied. Body cams may also be a good idea. Otherwise, without adequate accountability and monitoring, we'll end up providing avenues for psychopaths and sadists, just as we see with modern police forces today. Beard, division and sown discord. This may not apply to cases of individuals acting upon their own whims, but may be a tactic to apply against more organised group efforts. Beard revolves around disuniting and causing internal strife amongst an enemy. The Vichaar of this I will leave out for here, as it is a conversation more appropriate to have privately. You may think that trying to capture perpetrators is too much hassle. It would be easier to just kill them and be done with it, especially if it will put lives at risk trying to capture them alive, which is where the discussion of a military action versus an internal state function starts to kick in. Of course, I would agree with this. In fact, one of the strongest arguments in favour of a death penalty post-capture is that why should we be forced to pay for the upkeep of people if we don't want to? I do have some ideas to work around this, but I'll save that for another time. But given the modern technology and tactics, capturing people alive, although not always possible, is more possible today than ever. So all I'm saying is that if we have the means to, we should try it. If not, then oh well, but at least we tried. Trying intention is the most important part, since that is what is considered not so much more for the worldly battlefield, but for the spiritual battlefield, when fighting the true enemy, Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Ahankar. We must also recognize that death is a finality. It is the end of an individual's opportunity to get mukti in this life, and removing someone's ability to attain that is no small thing. We, in our egotistical perspectives, may believe people are too far gone, yet the same Guru in its earlier vessels were able to convince cannibals or murderers like Sajjan Thag to come into Sikhi. So too then must the Guru today, in the form of the Khalsa, recognise the ability for humans to reform and provide avenues in which this can be facilitated where possible. Here is an excerpt from the introduction of the Azaadi manifesto. Quote, "Almost every cell in the body is replaced multiple times through the course of one's life. The skeleton replaces itself every 10 years, red blood cells every 4 months, and the skin between 2 to 4 weeks. The human being at birth is completely different to the one at death. To even call this a human being is misleading, as it suggests a static entity. Perhaps a more accurate term is a human process. Not even the mind is safe, as it constantly changes its ideas and beliefs. Memories themselves can be updated, manipulated and distorted, or simply forgotten." End quote. People can change. Again, if we claim to be the inheritors of the Guru's status as the Khalsa, then we too must make the effort, where possible to reform and rehabilitate criminals. Not all will be able to, sure, but making an effort is our dharmic duty. And why wouldn't you want to try it? In a conversation with Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris gives an example when talking about a hypothetical pill that can eradicate the evil nature of people, specifically the root cause of ignorance, and the ludicrousness of refusing to administer it to criminals if we had such a thing. Quote, "It's like withholding the cure for diabetes from diabetics because of all the bad things they did when their blood sugar levels are too low." End quote. It may not be so simple as a pill, but if you have faith that Sikhi can change the nature of a person to destroy their ego and raise the level of consciousness, then why wouldn't you figure out ways to administer this medicine as the most appropriate action to take after you've apprehended someone for a crime? If you recognise the underlying motivations that lead people to commit such acts as diseases of the mind of sorts, as a result of Homme and the Banjord, then the cure isn't something as simple and easy as a physical death. Instead, it is ego death. Observe and be honest about the true underlying motivations as to why you suggest certain actions. There is a reason why Guru Gobind Singh says in the Zafarnama that when all other methods fail, it is only then permissible, it is only then halal to pick up the sword. To me, it is not so much for the protection of the enemy we try other methods, it is more so for our sake, spiritually. There should of course be consequences, but let's make it as fair as possible, because with such an emotional topic like this, it is easy to fall under the influence of Krodh. Remember that the real battle underneath all this worldly drama is your own internal battle against the Banjord. And this is where I will now play my trump card, the Sakhi of Baikanaya. This one story helps us directly answer the question of imposing death penalties for Beadbi, since the exact same thing was happening in this Sakhi. Just as enemies today tear the Angs of Sri Guru Granth Sahib, the enemy forces back then would cut the limbs and even kill members of the Sri Guru Khalsa Panth. Yet Baikanaya ultimately realised the same Ikwankar in all and served them all equally as the survivors lay wounded on the battlefield. In both instances, the Sargun Sarup of the Guru were damaged and destroyed. Yet Guru Gobind Singh praised Kanhaiya for his gyan as he understood the true message of Sikhi. Hence why, when a criminal is apprehended for Beadbi, we shouldn't escalate to death penalty now that they've already been incapacitated. We must make the effort to recognise the Ikwankar inside them, just as Baikanaya did. Treat such cases as a test of your Sikhi, and perhaps if you succeed, the Guru will commend you despite the protests of onlookers, just as he did with Baikanaya. You may be justified in fighting and winning great victories against the worst tyrants, but if you lose your ethics, mental state and focus on Ikwankar, then you would lose the ultimate war. This is why our Gurus were at the caliber they were, because no matter what the situation, whether they be confronted by cannibals or battling against the state, they never lost that presence of mind. If we expect to live up to the Khalsa's Guru status, then we too must strive for this. So therefore, if a perpetrator has surrendered or been apprehended, we are honour bound to only ever use the appropriate amount of force. If they resist and use violence to evade justice, then it is justified to match that. Escalate and de-escalate accordingly. This is a true test of mastery over one's mind for the Khalsa. The ability to kill the enemy if needed, but then also serve the same wounded enemy if not killed, to ease their suffering. Treat it like how the Guru would attach gold to arrows so that if the enemy was hit but did not die, he could pay for treatment, or if he did die, their families would receive a compensation. Hence why no discussion on justice can occur without compassion. Even for those with evil intentions, only compassion allows us to truly administer justice and not hateful vengeance. Compassion is the line that separates them, and the stronger the compassion, the easier it is to tell the difference and act accordingly. Daul Dharam Daya Ka Poot. The mythical bull is Dharma, the son of compassion, from Japji Sahib. Part 4. Prevention is the best cure. I understand people will be upset. Who wouldn't? But the goal isn't simply to just punish people, it is to prevent cases from happening in the first place. To achieve this, it requires a more rational mind, not an emotional one. If we were more proactive and less reactive as a Panth, then we wouldn't be crying about it on social media for about a week every time it happens and then forget about it when the next issue pops up to anger us. We would be making it a priority and working towards preventing it. Problems. If we don't want it to happen, we must understand why would somebody do Beadbi in the first place. The following are 4 possibilities. 1. Paid by others. 2. Desperation. 3. Ignorance of its value. 4. Mental illness. Clearly something is wrong with your head if you think this is acceptable. Then we should also ask, how can it be allowed to happen despite the above? We as a Panth must take some responsibility ourselves too. Simply blaming the evil nature of others for suffering is like blaming gravity for a plane crash. In Kaljug, there are always going to be enemies and those seeking destruction of our Panth. Hence, we must also take care in covering our bases and embodying the virtue of being Diyar Badiyar before blaming anyone else. There's no point blaming others if we don't take any precautions ourselves. There are two main factors as to why we are failing in this in my view. The first factor is that there's not enough beradars, and the second factor is that there are too many sarups. So solutions. I am now going to list a range of solutions now, not as a list in which we should just pick one from, but as a set of things I believe should be done in tandem. In cybersecurity, there is a concept of redundancy where there is no reliance on any one single system for security. What they do is stack up multiple security measures to account for the imperfections if each were applied on its own. By layering multiple solutions on top of each other, we reduce the gaps and lower the risk of failure. I used a similar approach when outlining Azaadism's conception of a modernized missile system in the Azaadist manifesto, and I'm going to use a similar approach here. I will list them out, but bear in mind that my recommendation is to do them all, not just one or two. If you are just listening, I recommend going and seeing the actual document on the Vichaar repository, because I've got a cool diagram there that sort of illustrates this point about layering security measures. Okay, so let's start with our own band's responsibilities first, since honestly there is no point changing others unless we change ourselves. So 1. Beradars. This should be fairly obvious, and I wouldn't expect much resistance to this idea that we should hire full-time security guard sarups. We claim Sri Gransa to be the king of kings and all that, yet we don't seem to treat it like it is. What monarch is just left unattended? There are so many in Gurdwara where sarups are just left on the palki or in Sachkhand, and there is at best half a city Gyani in the vicinity, sometimes not even that. There is nothing stopping members of the public walking straight in and doing whatever they want, which we have seen plenty of times now. Yet look at worldly kings, PMs and presidents who we consider to be minor in comparison. Every movement is tracked and no one can get close to them without standards and procedures. They are guarded intensely by security details, with the best training and equipment. If we truly believe in the status of the Guru, then we should make an effort to show it. Full-time, salaried positions should be commissioned for such roles, where there are fully armed beradars guarding the palki around the clock. The Gurdwara themselves should have risk assessments done to assess weak points in security. There should also exist plans and procedures in place to detail what to do in this or that scenario, and then these should be drilled regularly. Number 2. Artificial scarcity. The above may sound great to many of you, but only the naive would think it's realistic to implement such a thing for every Gurdwara in the world. There are simply too many to account for. So what should we do? I think let's scale it back and reduce the amount of available sarups for the time being. This will allow us to concentrate efforts and adopt a quality of quantity mindset with this. There are frankly far too many sarups in circulation to manage effectively, and evidently, serious cases of Beadbi occur as a result of this negligence. The proliferation of sarups also contributes to the Nirgun Beadbi of them as well, as mentioned earlier. Because there are so many these days, it is just taken for granted, and the value is evidently lost. The reason why gold is so expensive is because everyone wants it, but there's not enough of it. It is a basic economic concept, and it works for the opposite way around too. When something is so readily available relative to its demand, then the price of it goes down. This is what I believe has happened to the value of sarups in people's subconscious minds. This is why you may say all the praises and act all holy outwardly in the Gurdwara, but as soon as we are out of the building, we go back to our same old ways, which is again another example of Beadbi of the Nirgun aspect of the Guru. You can pay all the lip service you want, but as a community, our double standards and hypocrisy is clear to see. Therefore, I state that we as a band have not yet earned the privilege to have so many sarups all over the place. There are a few ways in which we can attempt to reduce this supply, such as unifying Gurdwara and Sangat in cities into one central location and pooling resources, something I might cover in more detail elsewhere. However, the single biggest resistance to such an idea is current committees themselves, who use the sarups as a prop to make money with via the golak, weddings and account paths. I recommend reading my post I released recently on Pakanda paths, which goes into that sort of argument a bit further. It is just a revenue generator for them. Therefore, I propose the following. Relegate the status of any sarup that does not match these three criterion. 1. Handwritten. 2. Ladiwad. And 3. It has to match the spellings and include all the characters and sections of at least one of the Pratambis. All sarups of the Sri Granth Sahib that do not meet this criteria should no longer be considered a Sargun sarup of the Guru at all. Since most currently available in Gurdwara are not handwritten or Ladiwad especially, this instantly creates the desired scarcity of Sargun sarups and now allows us to prioritize efforts on a far more manageable supply. Any sarups that do not match the above criteria at best would now be seen as a Godka or a Poti Sahib, obviously still worthy of Satkar, and at worst an unverified sarup. The latter is particularly important as it would take away any power philosophically from those who print sarups with the sections removed or spellings of Bhakti altered. I shall call this the Ram Rai protocol. The handwritten requirement also helps mitigate the risk of manipulators, since writing all of Gurbani by hand is a long, resource and labour-intensive process. This will not only make it far harder for the ill-intentioned to create Sargun Swarups of the Guru and match the above criteria, but all people in general. This is desirable because it will keep the supply low and will likely require community effort to produce new Swarups, not just the effort of printing press. Which would be really nice, to be honest. Jewish communities do something similar with their scriptures today, and when it is completed, they have a big celebration. That's how we should do it as Sikh communities around the world, be they towns or cities. Just come together amongst yourselves for a combined purpose. You could get members of the Sangha to contribute to the Angs as well, and it will be an experience that sticks with them for life. We need to make Sikhi so much more interactive in general, rather than just going to the Gurdwara, Matadek, eat langar and go home. Additionally, how do you think we used to have Swarups before the printing press? Exactly like I'm explaining above. Producing a new one would be a big thing, and there were so few in existence. You would need to go out of your way to go see a Sargun Swarup of the Guru Granth Sahib, and even the human manifestations of the Guru. And that would increase the perception value that we seem to have lost today. But what about existing Gurdwara? Gurdwara without Swarups of this calibre are no longer Gurdwara, since there is no Sargun Swarup of the Guru enthroned there. Henceforth, these should be reclassified as Dharamsals or Shastrakars, just as was the case before the printing press. This will do us some good as well, as it will take some power out of the hands of committees and Sangha to do all sorts of projects in those buildings right now with no regard to where they're at. The best part of all this is that it requires no top-down team of enforcers to go around and conduct removals. All it needs is for people to change their perception. I, for one, have already done this already, so I've already taken this first step, and I encourage others to do the same. Obviously, it's not the whole solution, but it allows us to more effectively prioritise and focus efforts on the reduced supply. The next steps would be to make an openly accessible database of all currently available Swarups that match the above criteria, and to record any new ones that are made by communities. This database should include all relevant information, such as live location, what bead it is based upon, etc. Maybe we could even leverage the use of blockchain technology to facilitate this, an actual practical use case blockchain technology perhaps, rather than just making gambling tokens. Or perhaps we could use alternative decentralized data solutions like IPFS. Ideally, we would have many independent bodies who would make and maintain their own databases, just like we have multiple Bani search engines today. It diversifies our risk when we do this, since if one goes down, we have backups. We really need to start becoming more professional as a month and leverage the latest technologies around us rather than it using us. Then we can pool funds to hire Beradars who would be assigned for the protection and preservation of a Swarup, whose information should also be added to the database. As part of this, a contract must be drawn and signed by the individuals stating their commitment to this role, as well as any punishments if anything is to happen to the Swarup they are assigned to. For example, infractions could range from modification of a single character to the destruction of a Swarup. This will be handed out regardless if the Beradar is at fault, since it was their responsibility to ensure no sacrilege occurs as per the terms of that contract. Regardless of who does the Beadbi to that particular Swarup, it's their head on the line. This helps ensure the incentive is always there to avoid negligence. Even now, before we get to the Beradar stage, or perhaps in conjunction with it, we should have accountable persons named and attached to Swarups who should be the actual Jathadar or committee members of the Gurdwara. Hopefully, that makes some of the power-hungry in the band think twice about taking up such responsibilities. Lastly, these Swarups should be made accessible by Sangatan who follow set procedures alongside an appointed Beradar and check to see for any mistakes in any new Swarups. This could even be done digitally by setting up a high-definition camera inside the Palki itself as the Granthi reads through the Angs, so that Sangha from around the world can help regulate this aspect. If even a single letter is missing or smudged, that Swarup will be flagged on the database, alert sent out, and it is declassified with the Guru status until corrected. If any tearing or damage is done, that too can be picked up and rectified ASAP. We could also be utilising artificial intelligence to set up automated detection systems and warning alerts of things. The whole idea with this is to scale back, get it right, and to a standard we should expect for the King of Kings, then expand as per these standards. Quality over quantity first, and then later quantity of quality, with the correct foundations. But the first step of recognition of what constitutes a Sargun Swarup of Guru Granth Sahib is an individual responsibility, not any institutions. Don't be sheep waiting for the Akal Jathadars to tell you what to do. They aren't popes. The more of us who adopt this line of thinking, the faster we can move to the next steps. So first conquer your own minds. Manijite Jagjita. If we don't take this first step, then many of the other suggestions are so far outside of realism it poisons optimism in any effort. But if we can scale down and prioritise the Swarups that match the three criteria, going to dub this the Dragon, then it is a more achievable task, and it can snowball into greater accountability via the systems we build. Eventually, with those systems, we can expand efforts to non-criteria Swarups too, as appropriate. But let's do this step by step. And then ask your Bantik orgs to get involved too. We create so much rolla on social media for problems and self-victimization, but no one should ever share solutions. Are we that demoralized as a band that only victim narratives are pushed? Do we want to stay in constant cycles of outrage culture? I don't. I don't think a lot of you guys do either. Now let's deal with the first set of points I listed at the start of the section as to why people would do such acts in the first place. I'll repeat them here. 1. Paid by others. 2. Desperation. 3. Ignorance. And 4. Mental illness. Economics. So firstly, if there are people so desperate for money they are willing to do such acts, then let's solve that desperation. The Sikh community in Gurdwara in particular should be providing employment opportunities or rejuvenate the economy of its surrounding regions, so that there is opportunity and prosperity wherever Sikhs are found. It should become known that wherever there is a Gurdwara, there is wealth and opportunity for anyone who is willing to cooperate and adhere to our standards. This should apply on the local, regional and global level. In my post titled Sikhs Are Irrelevant, I covered in more depth the cost of being such an uncoordinated community in terms of economic power. I encourage you to read that fully, but in essence, if you are not a community that produces value for others as a community, not just individuals, then why would we expect others to negotiate with us on fair terms? Power is trade. You give and you take. Those that can offer more get more back. If you become relied upon, you become irreplaceable. Your needs and wants become a priority. Your presence demands respect. Therefore, this is a long-term priority all Sikhs, and the Khalsa especially, should be striving towards in the modern world. Mental illness. An application of the above approach is producing value in the field of mental health. Why are there mentally ill people running around untreated? Here is an opportunity for Sikhs to get involved in helping. Not all world-changing projects need to be solely about acquiring a nation-state. There is a lot we can and should be doing in the meantime. Helping the populations of existing nation-states are one of them. Don't just say, oh, that's the government's problem, not ours. This is why I say so many Sikhs are not ready for their own state. They rely on the government for everything, particularly the neo-Khalistanis who sit on stages calling out the same governments they receive benefits from. Stop offloading responsibility to help others and the environment to a clearly corrupt system of modern governments, and put some effort into doing what you can privately, as independent non-state entities. The Gurus didn't go on a protest and hold signs urging the Mughals to collect more taxes and give out free food. They set up langars themselves. In a similar vein, let's also support those Sikh organisations and expand the efforts who deal with treating mental health, not just in our community, but society in general. A healthy society benefits us all, particularly as a preventive measure for any cases of Beadbi that may occur as a result of it. Ignorance to enlightenment. Additionally, why do people not realise the value in the Swarup? Well, I already covered one reason why above related to the lack of scarcity, but even then, some people's Shraddha is so strong that even despite that, they will treat any Swarup with the highest possible respect they can. These are those nameless types who silently conduct seva in small Gurdwara, where everyone else is busy or prioritise other things. But not everyone is like that. Tu Bayant ko virla jana. You, God, are infinite, only a few recognise it. From Guru Granth Sahib Ji, Ang 562. And there are some who are consumed by ignorance and hatred. They don't just neglect the Sargun Swarup, they seek to destroy it. These are the types who commit both Nirgun and Sargun Beadbi consciously. For these types, it is why we need the measures discussed above, where we take responsibility as a band to up the security and self-accountability. However, in conjunction with that, let's also raise the general level of consciousness of all people to have Satkar for the Guru regardless of background. As per the breakdown of Guru provided earlier, if the Khalsa is going to live up to the status of the Guru, then we too must be enlighteners also, bringing the light into darkness wherever we go. We should not be contributors to ignorance, as so many who merely cosplay as Khalsa do today and make a mockery of Bana, and instead be destroyers of ignorance. In the last section of the Azaadi's manifesto, there is one subsection I called Goal of Government and Enforcing Ethics. In there I taught about Kavi Santokh Singh's 3 ways in which to convince others. 1, through force, 2, through speech, but more highly regarded was 3, through example. We must strive for excellence as a people in both worldly, miri and spiritually piri matters, so much so that others marvel at our band and wish to be a part of it and not an enemy of it. Yet, these days, we can barely convince our own people born and bred in Sikh families to adhere to Sikhi and join the Khalsa. This isn't because their parents didn't slap them up and force them to go Gurdwara on Sundays. Kavi Santokh Singh's first method of using force, which in this case may have the opposite effect, nor is it just because our prachar efforts are subpar, Kavi Santokh Singh's second way of using speech, since we do have so many great resources and have had them for a long time, and to be fair, people are joining due to this. It is primarily because there are not enough good role models that preach the value of Sikhi, not through force or just their speech, but by the virtue of their character and success as human beings. Just look at parents who keep the gas on their kids but are slapheads themselves, who get drunk and behave like donkeys at weddings. What example are you giving? What environment are you creating for your gas-daddy kids? You must nurture the environment around your child in that way if you wish for them to keep that gift. Becoming the best possible representative for Sikhi is the best possible way to spread Sikhi, not just amongst others, but ourselves too. Once we start taking personal responsibility in this, then we will automatically see a reduction in those who merely see our troops as props for Akhand Path or weddings, and it also goes for Casablanca as well. Or even something you blindly bow down to ritualistically on weekends when you go looking for a free meal. People aren't even understanding the meanings of Bani. They are so used to old men in monotone voices murmuring for hours on end, half asleep. Even most Kirtan today is dead. No skill, no mastery, just rip off Bollywood tunes and simplistic tabla loops and bhaji that sound like pianos with asthma. Of course people are going to start devaluing Sikhi if this is the julus we're doing. Hence why again, I would have pushed the above recommendation of scaling it back and producing more quality over quantity. Build bridges, not borders. So this leads us on to my last point. Division is a symptom of hate and fear, and for a community who are supposedly striving to emulate the qualities of Ikwankar, such as Nipal Nirvair, we are so often fixated on our boundaries, the purest display of duality. We are far too closed off as a Panth, and should be sharing Sikhi with neighbouring communities in whichever country we reside. Isolationism is not strategic. Instead, we should strive for meaningful integration. I don't mean this in terms of pandering. Some Sikhs are indeed too humble for their own good, and delve far more into the pushover territory. If we desire to be respected, we must be able to stand for our principles, yet not be so confrontational either. This is the balance we must achieve when living amongst other communities. And we must live amongst other communities. If we do not establish our own reputations, then others will on our behalf. Hiding ourselves away in our own bubbles is the antithesis of our Guru's strategy. When Guru Nanak Dev Ji was on their travels, they came across a village who rejected to supply them shelter and instead showed them hostility. To them he prayed for them, so that they would stay comfortable in their village forever. When he came across the next village, who were the complete opposite, providing them lodging and care, he again made a prayer for them. Only this time, his prayer was for them to scatter, Udraja. Bhai Mardana, confused by this, complained to the Guru. Why was he cursing them but blessing the first village who showed disrespect? The Guru replied that he wished for the good to spread all over the world and share their good qualities with others. The foolish and bad-mannered should be the ones who isolate and keep to themselves, along with their bad qualities. Due to various circumstances, we as a Panth are only just now spreading out over the globe, but where is our focus? Due to various circumstances, we as a Panth are only just now spreading out over the globe, but where is our focus? We are so fixated on Punjab. Sikhs should be all over the place, showing presence, integrating and changing the societies around us for the better. We in the West are here not just because of circumstance, but also divine hukum in my view. We must realise this. Guru Gobind Singh themselves had urged the Singhs especially to settle in other areas of India too. Here's an excerpt from episode 16 of Ratan Singh Bungal's Prachin Panth Prakash. Quote, Jolpe, the Guru asked his Singhs to ask for any kinds of territorial awards. He would give them possession of vast territories and meadows, whatever kinds of material assets they aspired to possess. He would ensure to make those assets available to them. However, the Singhs' limited imagination could not grasp the extent of the Guru's assurances. They aspired to possess territorial rights over the Punjab alone. The Guru asked them to aspire for territorial rights over the superior southern region, as well as the mountainous regions of the east and the west. The Singhs retorted, why should they leave for far-off regions instead of living and ruling over the homeland in Punjab? They asked repeatedly for their sovereignty over Punjab alone, although this limited territory might lead to fratricidal wars amongst them. While the Guru exhorted them to aspire for a very large territory and exhorted them to occupy as much territory as they wished, but the nitwitted Singhs preferred to remain confined amongst their own kin, and aspired to settle scores with their own fraternal adversaries. They preferred to settle in the vicinity of their own home, and wished to occupy the homeland territory alone. These things being the offsprings of the poor and impoverished parents, how could they envision on a large vision imagination? Dohra, since narrow fraternal ties keep people confined to their own fraternity, the Singhs demanded to get settled in the vicinity of Punjab. Although the Guru wished to grant them sovereignty over distant lands, they lacked the imagination to aspire for a greater sovereignty. Jolpe. Finally, the Guru told them in clear and unmistakable terms that they would remain confined to Punjab in fratricidal brawls, but the Singhs who had joined the ranks a little later, they were directed to settle in other distant lands. End quote. The Gurus themselves of Chakravarti, They travelled all over to spread Sikhi, a tradition that started with Guru Nanak and their Udasis. The result of this was that the common man in the subcontinent respected Sikhi, and so did many of the rulers during those times. Obviously not all, but this is why today, if we are going to replicate this, we must combine it with the other measures discussed so far and do them in conjunction with this. Prachar in this way is a necessary component in our Beadbi prevention toolkit. Disarm bigotry via presence. People distrust what they don't know and rely on who they do know for guidance. Even if that known entity is a state-funded media outlet, propaganda, through constant exposure they become familiar. Hence we must make effort to become known, to show who we are ourselves, not through what the media or other charlatans say we are. Ignorance festers in darkness, so bring light to those areas. Give others the darshan of the Guru Khalsa. This itself is a kirpa that will reduce the desire to act against us. But it is critical then we actually become Khalsa in character as well. We can't just be seen as just another worldly power who comes and shows hostility to a citizenry, and thus are seen as occupiers or foreigners. We must be integral parts of communities, rejuvenating and protecting them, work with them, empathise, and find out their issues and solve them. If you produce value, you receive value. Interfaith activity, visiting mandirs and mosques must be a common outreach activity that Khalsa conducts. Many are more than willing to have you and show you around and talk to you about their faith. It will do us good as well to both learn and to teach, especially with Hindus who should be the easiest community to interact with and deliver Sikhi to. Our Guru's primary target audience for Hindus as well, and we have a wealth of resources we can use to relate to them and offer our own interpretations of familiar itihas, philosophies, traditions and terminology. The Gurus themselves use a common myths and culture. They drew from the Hindu resource pool extensively and relate Sikhi through those pre-existing and well-established systems and concepts. They didn't start from scratch with new myths and terminologies and avoid all mention of what was there before. Even our holidays are reinterpretations and refocuses of already existing ones such as Holla from Holi. The value is also closely shared, but we also have our own version of the Ramayana itself given by Guru Gobind Singh and Jobis of Talbani. Those of you familiar with Vichaar Natak may also be aware of Guruji pegging their lineage to the sons of Ramchandra himself, and by extension the Khalsa lineage too. I've got a post on this you should read if you're not familiar, again linked in the write-up accompanying this podcast. If Sikhi is able to spread and convert the Hindus, just like Buddhism did in the past, then you would pull the rug out from beneath the Hindutva fascist feet, who are so desperately trying to do the opposite of turning Sikhs into their conception of modern Hindus, which is really just a hyper-nationalist distortion of Hinduism that places the modern Indian nation-state as a sort of supreme pseudo-devta. So-called Hinduism itself is not a narrow-defined religion like these Bharat Mata Bhagats are making it out to seem. It is more of a culture like how Hellenism or Kemeticism was, with many competing and often contradicting schools of thought, sects, cults and religions within it. And it is worth mentioning to disarm any potential Indian fascists that Sikhi is indeed a separate tradition to Hinduism, and especially modern Hinduism. We may share myths and draw from that resource pool, but we are not bound to it, hence the references to the Abrahamic resource pool too. Perhaps the most clear argument as to why Sikhs are not Hindus is because we simply do not place authority in the Vedas. We may be in an Indic/Dharmic tradition, but we are distinctly non-Vedic. Like the Buddhists and the Jains, we too heavily reject the authority of the Brahmins and their caste system. And I want to spend some time on this, since if this is not sorted internally as a band, then building bridges is difficult. Some sects are so insecure when it comes to certain topics, and growing comfortable when hearing about what I just mentioned. You can guarantee if you use certain buzzwords, they start hyperventilating and slandering others with labels of RSS or Hindutva and all this other bakwas if things don't fit their standardized, watered-down interpretation of things. Some of these types are Hindu-phobic to the core, and have the phobia more in the sense of fear than the sense of hate. However, for some, it isn't always from a place of evil intentions either. There is now indeed a nationalist element to the label Hindu that has developed over the last century and has been hijacked by fascists for their new India nation-state project. As I mentioned, it is right to resist the attempted absorption of Sikhi into modern Indian nationalism that is wrongfully and deceitfully dubbed as Hinduism. But our overreaction to this mimics the throwing out of the baby with the bathwater mentality of the post-colonial Lahori Singh Sabha movement, which is where all this divisiveness started. But I won't go into that here. It goes too far outside the scope of this piece and instead will be covered in more depth in the upcoming pieces being worked on. Fundamentally, the Hindu-phobic fueled fear and the aspiration for clear boundaries of Sikhi comes down to a misunderstanding of what Hinduism is and is not, but also a lack of recognition of the difference between a Sikh and the Khalsa too. So let me define these as per how I understand it and have been using it since the inception of Azaadism. A Sikh is simply anyone who takes inspiration from the Guru. That's it. Here's an excerpt from section 5 of the Azaadist Manifesto. Quote, Azaadism does not recognize Sikhi as a religion per se, but the Khalsa order can fit into this category. The Khalsa is one particular way of expressing Sikhi. Other traditional ways include the Udasis, Nirbale and Sevapandis, and perhaps more recently the Namdari Panth or Daksali denominations. However, Sikhi on its own can be followed by anyone, even as Muslims, Hindus or any other religion, or none at all. Guidance can be taken from Sri Guru Granth Sahib and the Guru Khalsa Panth to whatever degree, regardless of any other label." End quote. If you're attached to SGPC definitions, then you probably won't like how loose and broad the above is. But it is the Khalsa where I believe the more strict definitions kick in. The Singh Sabha movement, regardless of its intentions, were the creators of modern Sikhism as a religion, whereas before I do not believe Sikhi could be classed in such a way. Religion is too deficient a descriptor, and it connotates a likeness to Christianity or Islam that is inaccurate to me. It is similar in some ways, but they exist on different layers. Sikhi is closer to the culture or tradition end of the spectrum, but not so undefined and internally inconsistent as something like Hinduism or Hellenism. But it is the Khalsa that is closer to that religion classification, and honestly, I think it goes further in its narrowness than even religions are. It is closer to being a company of sorts, or companies, when we finally do Azaadi-style missiles. The Khalsa has defined boundaries, disciplines and protocols, or at least it did, not so sure about today, but this will change. Its entry requirements should be high, and members should work to achieve specific purposes. It is a commitment and must be adhered to in specific ways, unlike Sikhi proper, which is far more broad in its application and thus inclusive. My personal standards for what classifies as the Khalsa are likely stricter than most, yet it is only an option to participate in, one of many ways Sikhi can be and has been expressed. There is also the spiritual component of the Khalsa and Nirgun related to its earlier usage before Guru Gobind Singh officially made the Khalsa as a forged Bhagavat Sargun, which you can see through Bhagat Kabir's usage of the term. But it was the latter Sargun conception rooting out of the more spiritual definition into a formal militia that was given the Gurgaddi. There is a dual reason why I like to define it like this. One is because I think this is the most accurate way to conceptualize Sikhi as per my understanding of what I have read and heard in my research, and I encourage everyone to do Vichaar for themselves too. And secondly, it provides a strategic benefit. If you make the barriers to entry to Sikhi so low, then just about anyone can make the first step, and that first step is crucial. Quote from Bhai Gurdas Ji: "A disciple who walks one step towards the Guru to take his refuge and goes to him with devotion and humility, the Guru advances to receive the devotee by taking 1,000,000 steps." End quote. But if we confuse the Khalsa and Sikhi together, then it makes the accessibility of Sikhi harder, and it isn't helpful for Sikhs either. We need to stop assuming that the Guru and Sikhi is just for Punjabis, but practiced in a very specific post-colonial inspired way. Just like how gold is found by sifting the dirt, so too must Sikhi be extracted from the culture that surrounds it. Sikhi is its own element, and its radiance can shine anywhere so long as we wipe it clean of the impurities that have attached to it. The biggest impurity being the single-mindedness of modern-day Masans seeking to impose their literalist and diluted thinking on all. There is a reason why wherever the Gurus travelled to, people fell at their feet regardless of background. We as sects need to stop gatekeeping Sikhi so much and actively spread the Sikhi of our Gurus through our manabaj karam, our thinking, our speech, and most importantly, action. Once we do this, then our Guru can once again be a Jagat Guru, respected and revered by all, thereby diminishing potential hostilities and preventing occurrences of Beadbi, both externally and internally. Part 5 Conclusion. In conclusion, Beadbi prevention is a higher priority than Beadbi punishment. This doesn't mean we shouldn't have punishments at all, but as I titled the previous section, prevention is the best cure. We are trying to prevent cases after all, not develop increasingly brutal methods to deal with perpetrators as they arise. We want to stop them arising in the first place. But human nature is like a river. You may want to stop the flow in a certain direction and instead use the water to irrigate your crops, but you would be a fool to simply erect a dam and block the current flow so that you may scoop up the water and take it to your field. This would cause a flood, and eventually, if not managed properly, that would overflow and burst the dam, coming out even more violently in the original direction. Instead, a wise person rediverts the flow and channels the water to where he needs it. Suppression without an alternative outlet is a recipe for undesired outcomes. We see this time and time again with faulty government policy, from abolition, the so-called war on drugs, to the celibacy of Catholic priests. If you simply damn human nature, it will come out later in far more distorted and degenerate ways. Providing alternative avenues to express and channel human nature in healthy ways is better than arbitrary suppression. Hence why true statecraft is all about establishing the correct incentive structures, not micromanagement and central planning. Without establishing the right incentives and opportunities, we will constantly be dealing with the symptoms and never applying the cure. As the old saying goes, you catch more flies with honey than poison. By bearing this in mind, I have come up with these measures, and we must use them all simultaneously to cover our bases. We must shift away from our victim-based mentalities and simple-minded blame culture, and instead take responsibility ourselves to create effective systems of accountability. In conjunction with this, we must recognize the macro factors that enable perpetrators and work to create systemic changes in whatever society we step foot in as the Khalsa, not through isolationism or conformism, nor through passivity or becoming too confrontational. We must be balanced and strategic. The Khalsa must focus on producing value in society so that we may become influential and relied upon, so much so that it becomes too costly to go against us, and more importantly, people would just not want to in the first place. In this post, I have given both micro and macro solutions. However, in order to attempt them, we need an actual functional Khalsa Panth again. So perhaps instead of prioritizing virtue signaling on social media all the time, put effort and resources into reinvigorating the Khalsa to carry out such undertakings. Too many people jump too quickly to wishing death, and I think they lack seriousness. People today, especially within the Panth, are so disconnected from death mentally, we just don't see it in reality, so we take life and death for granted. It is the same reason why we get so lazy with our Nithanim and Sikhi, yet get so hyped when it comes to outrage. But if we instead abandon reactivity for proactivity, then the question of whether or not to apply a death penalty becomes obsolete. So instead of arguing about that, let's argue about how best to implement these measures. ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਸ੍ਰੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।